You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions Special Episode 4. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Hello again, and welcome to our fourth supplemental log episode of the Tricorder Transmissions. We are your hosts, Jeff Hewlett.
And I'm Craig Cohen.
And in this extended discussion, we're going to be talking about one of the most popular Star Trek, the original series episodes, The City on the Edge of Forever, and a few topics that sprang from our scene-specific commentary episode that came out a few days ago. And to help us with this discussion, we're very happy and pleased to welcome back a prior guest and friend of the show, Star Trek The Experience actress, April Hebert. How's it going, April?
Hello again, boys. I've missed you.
We missed you too.
We spoke to April earlier this week on the introduction to our commentary track for The City on the Edge of Forever. And if you haven't listened to that yet, stop this, go back and listen to it, because we have an excellent discussion with April regarding her recent appearance in the Star Trek magazine related to her work on The Experience.
Yeah, that was a very fun discussion. That would be on episode 28 of our show. You can find it on our website at thetricordertransmissions.com or on iTunes. Just search the Tricorder Transmissions. So to kick off our discussion on City on the Edge of Forever, if you were to look up lists on the internet, fan-generated lists or critic-generated lists of the best Star Trek The Original Series episodes, you'll likely find that City on the Edge of Forever is among the top, if not the top episode on just about all of those lists out there. And I think that's with good reason. So what we wanted to do at the beginning here is to share our personal opinions or experiences with City on the Edge of Forever. A few months back, Craig and I did an interview with April and Vernon Wilmer, another actor from The Experience and friend of the show who has a great documentary about The Experience called Star Trek My Experience. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. And during those interviews, we asked each of them if they would like to come back on our show and discuss their favorite Trek episodes. And April immediately singled out City on the Edge of Forever. So because of that, we wanted to let her go first in this discussion. So April, take us through why you feel such a connection to this episode.
Well, I have to tell you that when I used to do the backstage tours at The Experience, I would introduce myself by my name, and then I would say, and Captain Kirk was my first crush.
Aww.
I know, he is, or he was. And it was largely because of this episode. Now, I know I'm dating myself when I say this, but I remember when the original series was, when it first came on television, I saw the first episodes as they aired. And I was young, but I was very much caught up in the story. And it was this episode that really made me love Kirk. And it was to the point where I'd buy those little fan magazines, and they have the pull-out poster that you could put up on the wall. And one month it was William Shatner in his Kirk uniform, and I put it up on the wall, and his eyes would follow me all over the room. It was it was my little 11-year-old dream. But I saw this man who up until this point had been pretty much a horn dog,
Yeah.
But I saw a man truly in love with a woman for all the right reasons, if that makes sense to you.
Totally.
Yeah, and I was just so, because I already thought that Kirk was beautiful. He's a beautiful man. But then I realized that that's love, which we'll go back and revisit later in this episode. But yeah, so I was just so pulled in by that. I have never forgotten this episode. It's when I think about love and what love means, this episode, just really comes to mind. And I don't know if that makes it a girly episode or not, but I think it's very powerful.
It kind of maybe is kind of a girly episode, but I have to say, and this may be a bad thing, I've spent a lot of my lifetime as a Star Trek fan discussing Trek episodes with other men. And this is maybe the first time I've heard a woman's perspective on a particular Star Trek episode, and it's really cool to hear a woman's perspective on Kirk himself.
Yeah, it wasn't that I disliked the other ways in which he was, interacted with women, or Star Trek as a whole. I love the adventure. I love all of that stuff. But that really spoke to me on an 11-year-old girl level. You're a little preteen who wonders what love is all about. And that really answered it for me. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, I think that is a good thing, because if you look at Kirk's interactions with women through the first season of Star Trek, the way he interacts with Edith Keeler on an emotional level is a bit different than the way he interacts with other women.
Yes.
So, Craig Cohen, how do you feel about this episode on a personal level?
This is an episode for me that is one of the ones that instantly jumps out whenever I think about Star Trek. It's, as funny as this sounds, back when Star Trek was only available on VHS, this is the only VHS episode that I actually purchased. Everything else I would kind of tape off WPIX when the show aired there. So sitting in my very small VHS collection, I still have this episode. And this episode also meant a lot to me because there was a point where I was reading a lot of science fiction, and Harlan Ellison is just a giant in sci-fi. So to see authors like him and Theodore Sturgeon attached to episodes would have me put eyes on them a little bit, closer. And to see that Harlan Ellison had written this when I was going through a period where I was reading a lot of his work and really, really, responding to it, it was great to be able to sit down and watch an episode of a TV show that he had written. He wrote for a lot of TV shows, but to have a Trek episode that he wrote was really, really special. And another thing that I want to hit on that I think April alluded to was, we sort of see the other side of Kirk, but we also see a really, really cool hetero male relationship between Kirk and Spock. And you see that it's a deep, deep friendship, which I think is what really makes this episode kind of stand out.
Yeah, there's a particular point for me that stands out, and it's when they arrive in the past and they are running from the cop and they arrive in the basement. There's an exchange between Kirk and Spock where they're discussing the situation, and Kirk kind of goads Spock by saying, he's trying to get Spock to create he expects that Spock can create some sort of technological gadget using whatever he can find in the time period. And when Spock kind of pushes back and says, well, the technology is limited here, Kirk says, maybe sometimes I expect too much of you. And Spock is kind of incredulous, like, whoa, wait a minute. So Kirk knows that if he kind of just needles Spock that way, he knows that he can kind of push him farther than he did just by asking for something.
Oh, good point.
Craig, can you touch a little bit on the love aspect of this episode, the Kirk's interpersonal relationship with Edith? Do you feel that there was a real legitimate bond between the two of them in this episode as kind of in a juxtaposition of the other women that he's been involved with so far in season one?
Yeah, and we briefly talked about this on our commentary, but I really think that this was and is the sort of love of Kirk's life, his soulmate, if you will. And the fact that they were separated by 300 years is really kind of a mind-blowing concept that sometimes you have to travel to the past to find your soulmate, which is, it's just a wild concept.
It is a pretty wild concept, and I'm gonna enact the bro code, and I'm gonna keep this from Carol Marcus as hard as I possibly can. So
she doesn't need to know.
So the only thing left to talk about here is my own personal feelings toward this episode, and something that I've already mentioned this on the actual commentary for City on the Edge of Forever, so I won't belabor the point, but thinking back on this, I remember from when I was a small child in the mid-1970s, late 1970s, when Star Trek was in syndication. This episode stood out for me not because of the love story aspect, but I was drawn to Mr. Spock. I kind of looked up to him as a role model. And during this episode, it really energized me to see him taking this archaic technology and using vacuum tubes and to create this futuristic device that could interact with a tricorder from hundreds of years in the future to create this this vision of the past that helped them to understand what was really going on. Thinking back on it on a personal level, it really resonates with me that the Spock was able to work with stone knives and bearskins to create something that ultimately resulted in them getting out of a potentially universe-destructing situation.
Right on.
Before you go on, we had that stone knives and bearskins thing that he created in the experience in our museum.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, and back in 2000 and I want to say 4 or 5 was the first time I went to the experience.
Yeah.
And I saw it there.
You're not the only person that was inspired by Trek to become, a scientist or get into tech or engineering and medicine. That those people would come up to me all the time and tell me how Trek had inspired them. Amazing.
It is, and I recently looked through a interview with James Doohan where he was talking about his honorary engineering degree, and he said that he was constantly running into fans and getting emails and written mail from fans who said that they felt the same way, that Mr. Scott inspired them to get involved in engineering. And to me, it's a mind-blowing concept that a television show, a work of fiction, can inspire so many people to grow in their own lives. And I think that that's a real testament to what Star Trek brings to society.
Absolutely. Yes. It was so important. It continues to be. Absolutely.
And I hope that it never becomes unimportant.
That will never happen.
So let's move on. There were, we alluded to this in the commentary, and Craig made mention of this a couple of times, that there was, Harlan Ellison had an original vision for this episode, and the script that he had come up with was a little bit different than what actually aired. Craig, do you want to take us through some of those script changes?
Oh, sure. There was a book that came out in 95 called The City on the Edge of Forever, the original teleplay that became the classic Star Trek episode. And it basically had a very long 15 to 20,000 word introduction from Harlan Ellison, as well as original teleplay. And, for various reasons, he was slightly rewritten to sort of bring the show a little, or the script a little bit more in line with the characters and, the established universe that, they had set up during season 1. But there are some interesting things going on in Ellison's original teleplay, which won a Writers Guild Award in the 70s. One of the biggest differences is the character of Beckwith, who is basically in the filmed episode is McCoy, and Beckwith is basically sort of a sour crew member who is dealing a drug called the Jewels of Sound, and he murders another crew member who's going to turn him in, and he basically flees into the past, which causes Kirk and Spock to chase him. For various reasons, he was replaced. There was a directive from CBS and Gene Roddenberry that every episode the Enterprise had to be in jeopardy. So Ellison, really against his will, injected a whole subplot into the episode where instead of the Enterprise simply disappearing after the past is altered, it is sort of transformed into a pirate vessel that is overtaken by like renegades. And there's a whole sequence where the away team is basically locked in the transporter room holding off the renegades. Ellison was against it from the get-go, and it eventually was dropped from the episode when I guess they finally decided that, no, the Enterprise did not have to be in jeopardy every episode.
It's in jeopardy if it's not there.
Exactly. That's the ultimate jeopardy. In terms of the Guardian, there were multiple Guardians, and they were in Ellison's script described as 9 feet tall. They didn't move very much. If you looked at them, you would almost think they were part of the stone structure, and they were looked like old men. They were of course replaced by the iconic Guardian that we got, and probably the biggest difference was at the end of the episode when push came to shove, Kirk cannot let Edith die, and it actually takes Spock's intervention to prevent Kirk from saving her, which is a huge difference. And I think the episode as filmed, that ending is a lot more effective.
Oh, yeah, because he is the one that makes the ultimate sacrifice.
Exactly.
You know, something that really sticks out to me, though, what you mentioned that in the original script there were pirates or renegades that took over the Enterprise, and this kind of screams mirror, mirror to me.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't know. I haven't read the original teleplay at all or any of the, edits that were made to it. But yeah, that does sound very much like, I wonder if they stole that idea from him.
Maybe that generated the Mirror Mirror episode or had something to do with it.
No, so he's got reason to be angry.
Definitely.
And he still is, isn't he? I think he is.
Yeah, there was a lawsuit that was filed outside of the courts back in 2009, and Ellison was quoted as saying he was satisfied with the outcome.
Okay, so he's not mad anymore because he got money out of it.
Yeah, money cures everything.
Jeff talked about this on the commentary portion. The episode, regardless of who did what on it, at the end of the episode, the only name you see is Harlan Ellison's.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah. Wasn't there like they had fake names for people who didn't want their actual name on it, right? But he used his name.
Yeah, and he actually had a pen name that he would use if he was unhappy with the episode, and there are a handful of things that he doesn't like about the episode, which he's only watched once, which is back when it was originally broadcast.
Oh, it won a Hugo Award. How bad can it be?
Exactly. And I think it's one of those things where you get too attached to your original idea and you can't really see the improvements that were made. And, there are some changes that were made that, he probably has a right to be upset over. I think the idea of the character of Beckwith is a really interesting one, but it's kind of neat to have sort of this, high on drugs McCoy,
guess.
But through space.
That whole thing about the cordrazine, only 2 drops will fix you. Why does he have an entire hypo loaded with it? And if only 2 drops will fix it, why?
Yeah.
It's kind of lame.
Yeah, and that's part of Ellison's problem with it. He says, what kind of incompetent doctor is McCoy that not only would he have that thing loaded up, but he would also stab himself?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Well, Craig, something else that I had read, and I don't know how accurate this is, but in the original script, there was Beckwith was a drug addict, and there was kind of a controversy, misreported that they said Scotty was his drug dealer.
Yeah, for years, Roddenberry would give interviews where people would ask him about the script. And even though he had private conversations with Ellison, according to Ellison, where they wouldn't sort of talk about the writing of that episode, he would point out flaws in Ellison's script that weren't there. And one of the major quotes was, "He had my Scotty dealing drugs," which Scotty wasn't even in any of Ellison's teleplays.
I'm so glad to hear that, because I can't see Mr. Scott doing anything like that.
No. But it is worth a look if you're
Scotch. You would have been giving him scotch.
Yeah.
But it is out there if you're looking for it, and it's an interesting read, especially if you're into those, alternate versions of stories. So it's kind of neat. It's a cool little novelty, sitting there on my bookshelf.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that you brought up that kind of stuck out to me was you said that Spock had more of a role in saving Edith or allowing Edith Keeler to die, but in the episode that originally was broadcast in the script that made it to air, there was a scene on the staircase where Spock is talking to Kirk, who's pretty conflicted. And Spock says something to the effect of, if you follow your heart, millions of people will die who didn't die before. Yeah. So was that moment kind of shifted back in the teleplay?
Well, actually, there is a scene where Edith trips and falls down the stairs in Ellison's teleplay, and Kirk goes to grab her, and then he lets her go.
Ooh.
And she sort of gives him this incredulous look. So it's a really interesting moment, because then by the end of the episode, he can't bring himself to not intervene. But there is a similar line in the script where, they're referencing the crew members who are back on the Enterprise in the future holding off the pirates, where, Spock says, "You have a responsibility to the people that you made a promise to, and the people that we left behind."
I think out of a lot of things that I've heard that are cut out of episodes, that seems to be a really effective piece of dialogue that may have been better to have been left in.
Yeah.
Yeah, to let him know that he's responsible for all these people, in the future that wouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it sounds like something, it really, to me, resonates as something that Spock would have done.
Oh, yeah.
As a character tool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but he does say Edith Keeler must die like 5 times.
He certainly does.
He's bringing home the point.
He certainly does. I maintain that all through the episode, Spock is the only guy that keeps his eye on the end goal. Kirk seems to be the one that kind of wavers emotionally on where things are going, but thankfully Spock is there to keep him focused on what has to be done.
Yeah. Kirk never, we never see him trying to come up with some alternate plan. Can I take her back with me? Or, that kind of stuff. That never happens. But I wonder, is he mulling all this stuff over in his mind?
One is left to wonder.
Alternate ending.
One is left to wonder. That kind of leads us into another topic, too, of the various paradoxes that are introduced in this episode. And there are quite a few, one of which is there's a scene in which, McCoy materializes in the past, and there's a bum there who sees him kind of jump out of a wall into a street. And the bum is standing there holding a bottle of milk that he's pilfered from a recent delivery, and he's kind of perplexed as to who this person is that just jumped out of nothingness and kind of drops the bottle on the ground and it smashes. But that guy eventually winds up rooting through Dr. McCoy's pockets, and he finds what he doesn't know it's a phaser, but he finds McCoy's phaser in his pocket or on his belt, and this guy kind of is monkeying around with the phaser and winds up vaporizing himself. And this episode makes a big deal out of the historical impact of one person's life, that person being Edith Keeler. So Edith must die in order for the future to remain intact. And if she lives, there are significant changes to the timeline that pretty much eradicate the Enterprise and life as we know it. Thinking about that, this guy, this bum, this vagrant who vaporizes himself is seemingly given no thought whatsoever in this episode. The guy's dead, he's gone, and the fact that he's gone has no impact on history. April, what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, that's always bothered me. I mean, was this guy so totally unimportant that the future was in no way changed by his death?
Right.
I mean, think about it. We like to think that we leave our mark on humanity, but are there people out there who make absolutely no difference, as to what happens? And this guy happened to be one of them. On the other hand, the idea that Edith Keeler is a focal point in time, that the future hinges on her, that I guess that is what they were going for here. I don't know how many of you are Doctor Who fans, but he also talks about there being, static fixed points in time. Mm-hmm. So, maybe Edith Keeler is that kind of focal point where that is the most important thing, and other things like time can be fluid around that incident, but that incident has to stay the way that it is. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, very much.
It does make sense. It does make sense.
But I when I first saw that, I was like, what? Are you kidding? Maybe that was his sentence for rifling through McCoy's pocket. Oh, you must die. You have stolen, therefore you must die. I don't know. I find it. I have compassion for this person anyway.
I do too. What about you, Craig?
Actually, I am going to go back to Ellison's original teleplay here for my answer. And in his original teleplay, there is a sequence where Kirk and Spock are fighting with Beckwith, and there is a homeless, legless war veteran who Kirk interacts with a few times in the episode. He sort of uses this guy to help get information. And during a struggle with Beckwith, the homeless man is vaporized. And when they get back to the Guardian at the end of the episode, they ask why his death didn't impact the future. And the Guardians very plainly and matter-of-factly say his life was insignificant.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Very cold.
That's even worse. That is, we like to think of ourselves as significant somehow, that are there people who are completely insignificant? Well, according to the Guardian or Harlan Ellison, yes, there must be people out there that make no difference, but boy, I would hate to be one of those people.
Yeah, I would too.
I don't think I am one of those people. I don't think anybody alive thinks that they're one of those people.
Well, that kind of lends you to think about a greater question, which is what makes you significant? Is it what level of impact do you have to have personally on history to make you quote unquote significant in the eyes of the Guardian?
Ooh, I just had a thought.
Go.
Okay, so maybe this guy had already done the thing in his life that had some impact on the future. Mm-hmm. And so he had already done whatever that was or whatever those things were. Mm. And so from this point on, his presence in the universe is unnecessary. Does that make sense?
Wow, no, that's great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm so brilliant.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So
April.
whatever he had, it just makes me feel better about it.
Yes.
It makes me feel better too.
Well, okay, we all feel better now.
Well, there are a couple of other things in the episode that were kind of paradoxical that I noticed while I was watching these things. I don't know if you guys have thought about this or not, but so Kirk and Spock, they get back into the past, into 1930 United States, and they're figuring out how they're going to prevent McCoy from doing what he does, or how changing the way he affects history. And the way that they do that is they purchase parts, electronic parts, and Spock constructs this apparatus that allows him to use the tricorder to view these recordings that he's made. So if Kirk and Spock had never come back into this point in history, those parts that Spock purchased, or Kirk purchased on behalf of Spock, would have been purchased by somebody else. Who's to say that the parts that Kirk and Spock purchased don't have an impact on somebody else in the future who may have purchased those parts? Or maybe those parts had a certain production run, and by Spock buying an extra 12 of these parts, deprives somebody else in the future of those 12 parts. My uncle is an audio engineer who deals in older vacuum tubes to service equipment. Now, these vacuum tubes are no longer in production, so all that's left is what's left from when they were in production. So they're very kind of precious materials. Who's to say that maybe Zephram Cochrane might have needed some of these vacuum tubes?
A vacuum tube. Okay, well, I have a headache now. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Going even further than that, Jeff, you could maybe pontificate that the store that they purchased these materials from, since it was the Depression, was in danger of going out of business, and Kirk and Spock saved the business by buying all of this material, hence altering the future.
Oh my God. We could go for hours on this.
Yeah, I think that, that I've always thought about those paradoxes, and I don't think that you can go back in time. Just the air you breathe, just touching something could have a major impact in the future. So time travel, I don't know about it, because, I just think that it would just open up so many paradoxes that although that may be, how they talk about how they're all things could be happening at the same time, and so we're just creating universes every second that we're on this planet. But again, that just makes my head hurt worse.
It does. It makes
we don't want that.
No, we don't want that. But April, think about this. Now,
you're just trying to torture me now.
This is something that we brought up on our commentary, that there's a scene where Kirk and Edith Keeler are walking hand in hand down the street, and Kirk is kind of flippantly talking about a writer from the future who's bringing up this, and he's just kind of throwing it out there. Doesn't that violate some kind of Starfleet code?
I don't think so, because I really think that Edith Keeler, well, sure it does, but he recognizes her as a woman out of time. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, when she talks about having, this foreknowledge of the future and nations coming together, and she talks about the Federation. She doesn't know what it is, but she talks about it, So she's obviously very prescient, and he sees that. And I just think their interaction is very natural. He's talking to her with all the, she's such an amazing person that he respects her gift, and so he's talking to her on that level. That's what I think.
That's a kind of a cool way to look at it. And I'm glad you brought that up, because Craig and I, during the commentary, were talking about how we were kind of taken a little bit out of the episode by the fact that Edith seemed to have so much insight into what the future was going to bring. So she kind of goes from, in the mission, during the one of the earlier scenes, while Kirk and Spock are eating their soup and bread, she kind of goes off on this speech about what the future is going to bring, and she starts off kind of by talking about harnessing the power of the atom,
Right.
So that makes sense. But Edith immediately diverges into a tangent about space travel.
I know. I love that. It's like one of my favorite parts of the episode that she just goes off on this amazing, kind of a rant about how we need to be alive for this. This is really important. Yeah, that makes her like so amazing. And I think
Wow.
that I have to say that I think Kirk is in awe of her
I agree. Well,
because
you know what?
she's got his number from the very beginning.
You know,
You know?
I got to thank you for bringing that perspective to me. I don't know about how you feel about it, Craig, but I didn't think about this, that she was in essence trying to appeal to these down and out guys
Absolutely.
who have very little motivation to get up and contribute to society, but she's trying to motivate these people by presenting them these grandiose visions of the future.
Yeah, she was definitely a glass half full type of person.
Oh yeah, very very positive, very compassionate. I mean, she's obviously full of compassion. There is nothing wrong with Edith Keeler.
No.
The only thing wrong is that she was born in the wrong time.
Yeah.
Yep.
She's the right person at the wrong time, as I think Spock says that, or somebody does, which is absolutely true.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And one thing that I have to stop and I have to applaud Star Trek for, when you look at the time period at which the original series was conceived and written and produced, this was not a time in the United States history where women were leaders in society. They were still fighting for their place. Now, for Star Trek to write such a strong and insightful female role, that's huge for a broadcast television show.
I love it. That's another one of the reasons why I love it, because she's such a powerful woman and she has the capability to to lead the world, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
She could be a world leader. Unfortunately, that would, her being a leader would cause the eventual end of America or whatever. And the eventual not happening of the Federation. So yeah, I mean, her power, she's an amazing woman.
Yeah, that's a huge point, and she definitely was, and it's a shame that when you look at her alternate path in history that she may have had, she had this humongous impact on America, so much that she met with the president and she started this humongous movement that delayed the United States' entry into World War II, so much so that the Nazis were able to harness the A-bomb before the United States and pretty much take over everything.
Pretty much blew us up.
Pretty much, but aside from that horrible Armageddon, Edith's contribution to society would have been huge.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, she's very different. So, any of the women that Kirk has had feelings for seriously pale in comparison to Edith Keeler.
Yeah, pretty much.
How could he not just love her?
Absolutely.
So, which makes it even harder for him to let her go.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into Kirk's prior loves very shortly. But before we do, the City on the Edge of Forever introduces the fourth time travel mechanism in the first season of Star Trek alone. That's pretty significant. So when you think about it, up until this point, this is the 28th episode in Star Trek, the original series, season 1. And when we get to this episode, we see the fourth version of time travel. The first version of time travel that we saw was in an episode entitled "The Naked Time." That episode was one where the Star Trek Enterprise crew was infected by a virus or a disease that kind of made them act more out of character. Some people went insane. Some people got more emotional. But during that episode, the crew of the Enterprise, the ship itself had been shut down completely, and they were kind of losing their orbit over this planet. They were rapidly decaying in orbit, and in order to save themselves, they cold started, which means they kind of just revved up the ship from nothing to full power immediately, and that had the effect of sending them back in time exactly 3 days. So this is a kind of a controllable method of time travel, albeit slightly dangerous by causing some stress on the ship. So looking at that version of time travel in juxtaposition of the jumping through the Guardian, there's a point where before Kirk and Spock jump through the Guardian to go back in time to stop McCoy, that Kirk pontificates that they could utilize the Guardian to go back a couple of days and stop McCoy from injecting himself. Would they have been better off beaming back up to the ship and just kind of stopping the ship and cold starting the engines to go back 3 days and preventing McCoy? What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, is that a repeatable thing?
Absolutely.
It seems like a little bit of a gamble.
More of a gamble than jumping through the Guardian and attempting to find out where McCoy changed history?
All right. Point, Jeff.
I'm keeping score over here. Keeping score. No, so what do you guys think about that? I mean, that...
I think that would have made for a very short episode.
Yeah. Good point. So, that particular version of time travel, the 3 days into the past by cold starting the engines, was never used again, to my knowledge. But it seems like that would have been a really great way to just undo certain things. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, you stub your toe or you overcook your dinner. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Or
really important things like that.
Yeah, or you beam a probe onto the ship that turns out to be some intelligent being who threatens the existence of the Enterprise. Hey, 3 days back in the past, done. Right? Or you encounter some long, super destructive piece of machinery that's going to blow up everything. Oh, yeah, it's just 3 days into the past. Let's fix everything. I mean, it seems like that would have been a very overpowering way to do it, but a very viable way to keep McCoy from injecting himself with the Cordrazine.
Well, okay, so when they went back 3 days, I guess they did. They were aware that they went back 3 days, right?
They were.
Ooh, oh man, there's so many problems with that.
There are. And it seems like for some reason, during the first season, with all of the different forms of time travel, the crew seems to have like an amnesia about the fact that they've discovered this version of time travel. Right?
Every episode is like a new beginning.
Right.
We don't know anything about what happened before.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. Yeah. Well, look at the next instance of the next 2 instances of time travel happened in the episode Tomorrow is Yesterday, which was the first time that the Enterprise was thrown back into Earth's past. So they kind of show up in orbit around Earth, and they're seeing the fighter jet coming to meet them, and they beam Captain Christopher onto the ship, and the plane blows up, and all kinds of things ensue. But there are actually 2 versions of time travel encased in that particular episode. One happens off camera, and it's how they arrive. So they encounter what we know as a black hole in space, which they kind of shoot through, and it kind of shoots them uncontrollably back in time.
Oh, right. It just starts, the episode starts with them already being back in time, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And Kirk has to do like a captain's log and give us the pre-roll on how they got back to where they are now. And, he's talking about how they kind of encountered this anomaly in space, which what we deem now as a black hole. And they show up kind of, they're all knocked out, and they're laying on the bridge of the Enterprise, and they're back in orbit around Earth, quite a while in the past, back in the 1960s, of course, which is where they always seem to travel.
It was handy.
Oh, it's convenient. Right, very convenient. So they're back in time. That seems to be a repeatable thing if they can find a black hole, but not necessarily controllable.
Yeah, that sounds pretty iffy, like dangerous.
Yeah, it's kind of haphazard. Like they come across a black hole and say, hey, look, we can go back in time through this. We don't know where we're going to wind up, but let's fly through it anyway. But in this particular instance, they didn't know what was going to happen. But at the end of that episode, there was a very significant form of time travel that they discovered that would be reused later, which is the infamous slingshot around the sun time travel method, which famously was reused in Star Trek 4. They used it to go back and find the whales and then come back in the future. Right. So, again, in the context of tomorrow, the City on the Edge of Forever, could Kirk have said to himself, hey, listen, why don't we beam back up to the ship and let's slingshot around the sun and we can go back a few minutes before McCoy injects himself with the Cordrazine and just say, hey, whoa, doctor, put that thing down.
How close to the sun are they?
Well, it doesn't really matter because it's a controllable method. Like Spock can just do the calculations and say, okay, we need to fly 17.68 seconds, slingshot from the sun. And hey, we're back, 5 minutes before McCoy walks onto the bridge. We can have a little confab and talk about what's going to happen. And when McCoy comes on, somebody can grab the thing out of his hand and say, hey, whoa, guess what you're going to do?
But you know what, Jeff? At the end of the day, you're not able to travel to 1930s America.
Well, okay.
That might have been the appeal. It's like, hey, we have to go fix what McCoy did. And in the process, we're going to get to spend some time in the 1930s.
Okay. That might be appealing.
Couldn't they? I mean, if they precisely did that maneuver and precisely determined where they were going to go, I mean, they could go anywhere.
Pretty much.
Anytime.
That's the point.
It's an alternate Star Trek series where every week they just time travel.
They just right.
Hey, Quantum Leap, anybody?
Yeah, sliders, whatever.
Yeah. You built a whole Star Trek series off of time travel. That's what they could have done that with DS9. The wormhole could have been a time travel device. Indeed. But at any rate, and in the City on the Edge of Forever, we discovered the fourth mode of time travel, which we know as the Guardian of Forever. And they do reuse that in an animated series episode that kind of takes us back and looks at Spock's childhood, which is kind of cool. But so they've gone into the Guardian, they've fixed history, they come back out, and Kirk famously says, "Let's get the hell out of here and leave the Guardian behind." But don't you think that now that the crew of the Enterprise knows where the Guardian is located, wouldn't they think that, they kind of have the ultimate weapon at this point?
Plus, it sounds like the ultimate vacation machine to me, because the Guardian was way excited about, hey, I can take you wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, thank you. Bye-bye. So, yeah.
Totally. And
did they make that planet off limits afterwards? What did they do to keep people away from that? Because I would do that.
Yeah. Well,
I would jump through.
If you look back at the menagerie, the planet that that Captain Pike had his adventure on in the cage was completely blocked off to anybody via Starfleet, and in fact, just going there got you a court-martial and potentially a death sentence.
Yeah.
Right. So now, did they do the same thing with the Guardian planet? Because the power that access to the Guardian afforded you is pretty much the ultimate power in the universe, right? I mean, you could
imagine the Klingons at that time finding the Guardian.
Oh my God, they could totally go back and undo everything that happened in Errand of Mercy.
Yeah, everything.
Kill Kirk and Spock, they take over the Organian planet, and Federation done.
So yes.
Yeah, it seems like a real, but think about it this way, the Enterprise crew, they know where this is, nobody else does. Now, don't they kind of have the ultimate weapon to undo anything else that happens in the future? Couldn't they just like, oh my God, this terrible thing happened, and we ran into this horrible enemy, and we lost a lot of people in the Enterprise. Let's just go back to the Guardian planet, jump back in time, and fix everything. It's kind of an overpowering thing, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that kind of thing, you couldn't not do it. You'd have to do it.
Right.
So.
Wouldn't you as a human being be compelled to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, in the animated series episode where they actually go back and are using the Guardian again, it's almost in a nonchalant way. They're kind of just like, they go in there, they look in the past, and they see what happened, and they kind of observe things on a first-person basis. So they're utilizing the Guardian in that way in the future in the animated series. So it's interesting that they never revisit that again in the original series.
Well, maybe we just, as a species, have more self-control in the future.
You would like to think that.
We're like, yeah, that would be bad, so we're not going to do it for that. We'll just go look at other places. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Anyway.
Oh, I'm glad you have such an idyllic vision of the future.
Oh, well,
What do you think, Craig?
I think it's one of those cases where potentially viewing this series versus living in that universe, it might not be at the forefront of your mind all the time.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, too.
Busy, you got other stuff to do, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, when you're caught up in the moment, you might not think that, oh my God, we have multiple ways we can fix this problem through the various means of time travel at our disposal.
Yeah, well, you think you're a couple of months travel away, crewman XYZ dies. Is he really worth going all the way back to the Guardian?
He's one of those people that doesn't matter.
He's the bum. He's the bum. He's the bum.
Oh, man.
So, moving along, we talked a lot about Kirk's various love interests throughout the first season of Star Trek, and there are quite a few. Edith Keeler, we seem to all agree that Edith Keeler is the soulmate, if you will, of Captain Kirk so far. But the first love or interest that he seemed to have was crewman Janice Rand. And she kind of made her exit unceremoniously earlier on in the series, and we know from reading up on this that the writers originally intended to have Kirk be emotionally involved with Janice Rand throughout the series. So, she exits the series. What do you guys think of Janice Rand versus Edith Keeler as far as a romantic foil for Kirk?
Janice Rand is available. That's her only, she's right there. Just saying. Is that harsh?
No. No, what about you?
She's pretty. I got it. He's a guy.
She had a wacky hairdo.
She whacked out hairdo, yes.
Totally
For
whacked
me,
out hairdo.
the Janice Rand, Yeoman Rand relationship always made me feel slightly uneasy.
It definitely did.
It seemed like Kirk was dangerously close to stepping out of line.
Yeah, he's her supervisor, for crying out loud.
Yeah,
Exactly.
really.
You don't do that.
Yeah, you don't. All right. So in the series, the next one of Captain Kirk's, well, quote unquote, love interest was Andrea, the android, in What Are Little Girls Made Of? Now, one could argue that he was just kind of messing with her to get over and throw her off guard because she was an android and he couldn't escape.
I think that's a good argument, just saying.
It is. But if you go back to our episode on what Are Little Girls Made Of, you will hear me confessing that I thought that Andrea was the hottest Star Trek, the original series babe there was. And I hate to think that Kirk would mess with her mind like that. What do you guys think about that?
She didn't have a mind.
She did. She was an android, but it's okay.
I guess. Yeah. Oh, beautiful. I can't remember the actress's name, but yes.
Sherry Jackson.
Stunning. Yes, Sherry Jackson, yes. And she actually was in a lot of other stuff, and she's a very good actress. Um, yeah, I guess, that she had every right to be who she was as any other sentient creature. But yeah, I don't think so. I think he was messing with her. I really do. I think he thought she was attractive. Obviously she was, but I don't see that as love.
What do you think, Craig?
If Star Trek, the original series, was made in the late 90s, they would have brought her back to the ship and she would have become a regular.
Oh, totally. Oh my gosh.
So you're making a 7 of 9 reference, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, I think Kirk had the option if she didn't take out herself and Corby, she could have sort of just hung out in Kirk's room all day, I guess in off mode, and been a little bit of entertainment after Kirk clocked out.
Absolutely. If they had left the same outfit on her, I'm sure Kirk would have loved that. Just open that closet door.
Come on out, honey.
There she is.
Yeah.
So moving along, now another one of Kirk's. Well, this is not necessarily a love interest of his, but someone who was interested in him was the teenage girl, Miri, from the Miri episode. If you go back and watch that, Janice Rand is there, who was still, quote unquote, the love interest of Kirk at the time, and who is very embarrassed by the fact that she has these weird looking sores on her leg and didn't want Kirk to see her like that. But Miri, the girl, kind of falls for Captain Kirk and his charisma, his father-like or big brother-like charisma. Now, Edith Keeler is his soulmate, but Miri looked at Kirk as this wonderful person, and he didn't look back at her the same way. But is the love maybe the same?
You mean on her part?
On her part, yeah.
You know what? I would equate Miri with my teenage crush on Kirk, which, yeah. In fact, I remember that episode, seeing that episode and really relating to Miri as like, ooh, he's so perfect, that kind of thing. But now that I look at it, it's a bit creepy. At the time, I was very young, so yeah. But he certainly didn't reciprocate that in any way.
No.
Yeah, I think he handles it pretty well on that episode. He understands that he's dealing with a very, very sort of fragile person, and really needs to treat her with quote unquote kid gloves.
Yes, yeah, no, that he is very what's the word? He's compassionate in that, so he allows her to have those feelings for him, and he's in return compassionate and almost father-like to her. She obviously needs an older person to guide her. So,
yeah. It seems like he's keenly aware of what her feelings are for him and does everything in his power not to lead her on,
right?
But to still be a father figure almost, or brother figure to her in that tough time.
Yeah,
yeah. So. Okay, so next one, there's tons more. So next one is in an episode entitled The Conscience of the King. And that one is in which an actor, the Anton Caridian, is actually the murderer who Kirk was part of this colony back in the day. And, this guy had pretty much used his power to say who was going to live and who was going to die. But Kirk's love interest in the episode is actually his daughter, Lenore Caridian. And one could probably say, watching that episode, that Kirk was pretty much using her as a tool to get to her father. But he really seems to sell it a lot to me in that episode, that he does seem to really have an interest in Lenore Caridian.
Oh yeah, well, she's talented, she's beautiful. What's not to like? But the way that episode is written, I think there's something weird about her from the very beginning.
Yes.
And so it kind of negates any feel. She's hot, so he's going to do something with her. But yeah, I don't think that he. I think he picks up on the weird. I really do. So he sells it. He does a good job selling it.
Yeah,
But
I agree with you, April. I think Kirk sort of had Fatal Attraction type visions in his head of a poor little bunny rabbit being boiled.
yeah. But
Yeah.
he sees it more than God, I can't even remember the name of the Fatal Attraction guy.
Michael Douglas. I don't remember his character's name.
He sees it more. That guy just kind of doesn't see it until it's too late.
Yeah, he was really caught up in it.
Yeah, I think that that Kirk sees Lenore as not quite all there. So.
Well, Lenore does get one thing from Kirk that no other women in the series get, and she gets that walk in that promenade area over the shuttle bay with the romantic lighting. Edith Keeler didn't get that.
Now, you don't know that he didn't take every woman up there. But
well, it wasn't documented in any other way.
That's right.
She was the only documented trip to that area of the ship. So
that's his favorite place. What are you talking about?
So the next one in the string may have more weight than the previous ones, and that is on an episode called Shore Leave. So Kirk and other members of the crew wind up on a planet that manifests their fantasies, good or bad, in a real way. So it creates people out of nothing. And while Kirk is there, he experiences a reunion with a woman named Ruth, which he had some sort of a relationship with back in his academy days or earlier. And that connection seems to be pretty prevalent in his mind because he opts to take the rest of his shore leave at the end of that episode with Ruth. So looking at that in juxtaposition to Edith Keeler, Kirk seems to have some sort of a real emotional connection with that lost love, Ruth. So who's to say that Ruth isn't his true soulmate versus Edith Keeler? April, what do you think?
Well, I will tell you right now that if she was, he would be with her.
The plant-based version of her?
No. I mean the real Ruth, whatever. Yeah, because if he's not a stupid man, and I think that if he found love, they would be together on the ship, she'd be the captain's wife, whatever. So obviously he has feelings for her, not negating that. He absolutely does. But she's a part of his past. So he revisits that because that's nice, we revisit our past. But he's if he wanted her, he'd go find the real one, and she's just a figment of his past.
Excellent point. Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, I kind of, think along the same lines as April here, where it was sort of a part of Kirk's life that had been put to bed. And it was kind of cool to peel back the sheets and enjoy it for another couple of minutes. But
I like those sexual references, by the way. That's good.
Thank you. But at the end of the day, it was something that he was done with, and in life, a lot of times when you work through the logical progression of something, when you're done with something, you're done with it.
Yeah, but it was fun, he knew that it was a freebie,
Yeah.
Nothing was going to come of it, so he could just have fun.
So Kirk sowed his wild oats, so to speak.
That's right.
All right. So speaking of Kirk sowing his wild oats, we come to the next woman in the chain, and that one is a woman by the name of Ariel Shaw. And she winds up being the prosecutor that is the opposition in Kirk's court-martial in the court-martial episode. So we find out that Kirk, he's supposedly negligently killed a man on the Enterprise by pressing the jettison pod button by accident. Expect to hear some laughter from Craig on this.
Yeah, it's just such an absurd theory that on the control console there's like, red alert, yellow alert, and jettison pod.
And jettison, yeah.
So he accidentally presses this jettison pod button and kills this man and winds up getting court-martialed for it. And the lawyer who's prosecuting him in this court-martial is Ariel Shaw, who Kirk has had some involvement with in the past. Yet another one of Kirk's past loves. Right. Now, this one doesn't seem to have the intensity that maybe Ruth had or possibly Janice Rand, but she's there nonetheless. And I don't think we can argue that she was his soulmate. But looking at her versus Edith Keeler, what's in your mind, April?
She was. I think that she feels the same way about Kirk that he feels about her. That was fun. We're together. No big deal. I think that she is a party girl.
Oh.
I mean, a lawyer party girl. So she doesn't have any connections. I mean, I just think that those are not, like, her connection with Kirk is one that's she's had for a while. Maybe she's the girl in a port. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think they are on the same page as far as their interactions, their relationship with each other.
What about you, Craig?
Yeah, I think that she was sort of a casual acquaintance. And, again, very much in line with April's take on it. I think it was, sort of a mutual understanding they had. And,
friends with benefits.
Exactly. Whatever they call that in the 23rd century.
Wow. So apparently it has the same name as it does today.
That's right.
Well, it's so effective. It clearly defines the relationship.
Yeah. Okay. I can go with that. So finally, we come to to Edith Keeler herself, which we seem to all at least tacitly agree it was Kirk's soulmate up to this point. Now, looking at her versus all of the past loves, we can see that Edith herself had a certain something that the other ones didn't have. So do we have any more thoughts or insights on their potential relationship or where it might have gone had they been able to flesh it out more, barring this time travel issue or her passing on via the car accident? April, what do you think it would have been like had they been able to continue?
Oh, well, I think that he would have, I mean, who am I to rewrite the script? But
if Abrams can do it, you can do it.
That's right. He would have found a way. Like I said, I'm sure that his brain was working overtime to, like, how can I make this not happen? How can I, I don't want her to die. I am in love with her. I mean, he comes right out and tells Spock, who shows remarkable compassion at that point. You can see it in Spock's eyes. He's like, oh God, this is not good, because he knows what it's going to do to Kirk, and he cares about Kirk, so there's so much going on in all this interplay between relationships. And I mean, what I think about Edith Keeler as a person. She's amazing, and Kirk knows that. And I think if it was in his power, he would have, he has to make the choice to give up the universe for her to stay alive, because the universe may not exist, at that point, as he knows it. So that's powerful. I don't think there's anything more powerful than that.
Craig, what about you?
Yeah, I think that had they somehow been able to, have, this situation work, I think it would have had a huge impact on Kirk as a person, and also on Kirk's career. I envision a scenario where Kirk would somehow have a reduced role in Starfleet and would sort of find maybe a nice little farm on Iowa where him and Edith could spend some time together.
I don't know. She's a pretty powerful person.
Yeah.
So I don't think that she would give up that power either. I mean, she could be some major ambassador if for some reason he could manage to get her into the future without killing her, but taking her out of the her reality and bringing her into the future. She's not going to go live on a farm. And I don't think even if he stayed there with her and took her out of the limelight, she wouldn't be able to do that, that she had too much going on. So unfortunately, Edith Keeler must die.
Oh,
that is an excellent point, April.
That is an excellent point. But looking at the episode as a whole, and looking at the choice that Kirk ultimately had to make while he's standing on that curbside and he's grabbing on to McCoy to keep McCoy from saving Edith Keeler from getting hit by the car. I'm just kind of putting myself in that situation where Kirk is in a position where theoretically he could give up his future. He could give up the Enterprise and all of the lives on the Enterprise, with the exception of Spock and McCoy who are with him, and allow for the Nazis to take over the world in a few years' time, versus his love for Edith Keeler. I mean, I said during the commentary that I wouldn't have any trouble making that decision. Craig, I don't know. I don't think you would have any trouble making that decision. But he does seem to have a bit of hesitation there, where the love is almost powerful enough to let him say, okay, maybe I'll just take these next few years with Edith Keeler and be really happy with my soulmate, and then just let the chips fall where they may, versus let her die. It's a huge decision for him to make.
Yeah, I don't think as a captain, you don't get to where you're the captain of a spaceship without understanding sacrifice, that's exactly what's going on right here. He's sacrificing in a way that Spock ends up doing, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that. The parallels of Spock's sacrifice in Wrath of Khan versus this sacrifice on Kirk's part. That's a great insight.
Yeah, because you might be thinking that Edith Keeler's doing the sacrificing, but she's not. She doesn't choose to die. She doesn't know she's got to give up her life. So she's the best. She's got the best outcome of any of these people. She's gone. So the person who sacrifices is Kirk, because he finally knows what love is.
Phew.
And now he has to give it up so that humanity can continue.
That is deep.
I know.
Wow, I'm bummed out now. Craig, are you bummed out?
It's the most painful thing that he's ever done, and possibly anybody's ever done.
Do you think that if Edith was presented with the truth, do you think that she could have been convinced to sort of change her approach?
Wow.
That would allow time to sort of right itself without her dying?
Wow.
I don't know.
Oh my God, man. I think you just totally destroyed that episode.
It's sort of like
they were trying to keep the Prime Directive by not interfering.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can understand why they didn't do that, but I'll bet you that crossed his mind.
Wow, my mind is blown. There have been several episodes that Craig and I have done commentaries for where I remember saying, if they have just leveled with the aliens at the beginning of this episode, all of this crap could have been avoided.
Yeah.
This is another one of those scenarios where if Kirk or Spock had just come out to Edith and said, listen, this is what's going to happen if you do this, maybe they could have just resolved the whole situation without anybody
Possibly, but
dying.
they may have because they may have made it worse. They knew these two outcomes. Either she dies or she doesn't.
Yeah.
But they weren't able to see any other outcomes. Those were the two choices that this machine gave them.
Yeah. It's definitely very risky.
Yeah. Yeah, what would have happened had she remained alive? So you just never know. Anyway, like I said, and that's why it's one of my favorite episodes, because the theme of sacrifice, which is a very common theme, but it's also one of the most powerful themes out there in the literature. So
I definitely agree. And we've talked a lot about this episode, and I think we could probably go on talking about this episode for hours and hours and hours more. But for the sake of our listeners out there, why don't we take a quick moment to give our final thoughts on City on the Edge of Forever. We've all come a long way in this talk. And April, what are your final thoughts on this episode as a whole?
Well, like I said, it's one of my favorites. It's certainly my favorite of the original series. I think it's because this is real tragedy. It's real tragedy because people sacrifice. It has love, it has deaths, it has, fighting, it has time travel. It's got everything you could ever want in a Star Trek episode. And it leaves you when Kirk says at the end, "Let's get the hell out of here." That's probably the most relatable he is in the entire original series. Is that you really feel his pain, and it doesn't get better than that.
Wow. Craig Cohen, what are your final thoughts?
I think that the City on the Edge of Forever is really Star Trek stripped down to its most basic form in terms of demonstrating why the series is so great. There aren't really any smoke and mirrors in this episode to sort of distract us from the characters and who they are, and what they do that sort of defines who they are. And I think this episode really sort of affects the way you look at Jim Kirk moving forward. You can find, hints of his sacrifice throughout his future performances, even if he wasn't aware of it. I think it's an important episode just because of how important it is to the character of Jim Kirk. And I think it really showcases the bond between Kirk and Spock. And even at the very end of the episode, prior to Edith getting killed, you see the joy on Kirk and McCoy's face, and as joyous as Spock can look when the three of them are reunited. So I think it's an episode that is sort of built around the trifecta that is Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, who really are the centerpieces of that show. So it really, like I said, it's Star Trek at its rawest. And a lot of times when you see a story told, that bluntly, it can't help but be effective.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. And the only thing that I would add to what the two of you have already said is that the basic story that's being told by the City on the Edge of Forever, I think transcends Star Trek. Meaning this story could have been told by a multitude of other series. It could have been a Twilight Zone episode. It could have been Outer Limits. It could have been Quantum Leap. It could have been X-Files. It could have been any sci-fi series, and it probably would have been as effective as a story itself, because you have all of the key elements there. You have the science fiction, of course, of the time travel itself, but you have the love story between Kirk and Edith Keeler. You have the logical guy of Spock who is acting as Kirk's other half, essentially, kind of trying to keep him grounded and away from his emotional side, and letting him know that, I know how much you care for this woman, and you have to make the ultimate sacrifice, and which leads him to make that sacrifice, which is such a key point of the story. And the interplay between the characters, the character growth between all three of them, and the loss that Kirk feels. I think that the story itself is so much bigger than just Star Trek, but I'm glad that it happened in the original series universe, because these characters were able to grow through this experience, and we were able to be here today talking about it. I think that we've had a really great discussion about this episode so far, between our commentary and this extended episode, and let's kind of wrap it up and close it out here. And any final thoughts from the two of you guys on this before we close it out for the listeners?
I just want to thank you for inviting me. This was so much fun. I love to talk Trek.
Awesome. And April, we knew that you would be the perfect companion to come along with us on this extended look at the city on the edge of forever. So I'm glad we were able to do this, and it's an episode that I am already looking forward to listening back to. Doing a little bit of time travel, on my own.
Yeah, we had fun.
Yeah, April, I will reiterate Craig's comments, and I remember back when we did the interview with you and Vernon, and when we went off air, we had the little conversation after about what episodes that you guys would be interested in coming on for, and you had singled out City on the Edge of Forever. And I know Craig and I are really excited that you've come back on and you've talked about this episode with us. We were looking forward to this for quite a while, and I'm glad we were able to all get together and talk about this, because I know this is an episode that's near and dear to your heart. And it's an episode that Craig and I are quite fond of as well. So I think this is a great experience for all three of us and for our listeners. And with that, we'll close out this extended episode of the Tricorder Transmissions. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you again next week.